So as Renee and Billy said, I am Franny Preston. I'm the Invasive Species Outreach Coordinator here at UK. And today I'm going to be talking about invasive plants that you can eat. Just want to give a couple of disclaimers before I begin this presentation. First of all, there are some invasive plants that have some lookalikes that could be toxic. And so before you eat any invasive plant, just as if you were foraging for any other food, you want to make sure that you know 100% what it is. And you can figure out what it is with some field guides, or I like to use iNaturalist. That's a pretty reliable resource. Or if you need to ask your county agent, ask them as well. And also, if you maybe have some allergies to similar plants, make sure that you just introduce these very slowly into your diet. So make sure you know what the plant is before you eat it, and then just carefully start eating them. Another just thing I want to bring up is if these plants are on your property, please eat them. Go for it. If they're on your neighbor's property or maybe in a natural area or a park, you want to make sure you ask permission. For one, you don't just want to be stealing plants out of your neighbor's yard, but also herbicides are used to mitigate invasive plants. They're a really effective control method. However, we don't want to be eating plants that have just been sprayed with herbicides. So especially if you are in a natural area where they're probably using herbicides to control invasive plants, you want to make sure that you ask the landowner or the park manager, the person in charge of the property, just to make sure that the plants are safe to eat, but also that you have permission to take them as well. But because invasive plants are such a big problem, I almost guarantee you that everyone will be happy with you taking them off the property. All right, and just to make sure we're all on the same page with invasive plants, when I'm talking about invasive plants, I'm talking about plants that are non-native, so they're not from Kentucky. And these are plants that are causing some sort of harm. They might be causing harm to humans, or they might be causing harm to the environment, or both. So why do we want to eat these invasive plants, and why do we want to get rid of them on the landscape? Well, like I said, they're causing problems either to humans or the environment, or most of the time both. They're causing harm by decreasing biodiversity, which means they're reducing the amount of native plants and animals in the ecosystem and upsetting the entire ecosystem that way. And for us, they're causing economic or lifestyle impacts as well. So these are all plants that are causing harm, and they're all throughout the state. So along with that, while these plants can be really great to eat and we can use them, and in that way they're benefiting us, again, they are causing problems and they're causing harm. And so once we take the part of the plant that we want to eat, we want to get rid of them on the landscape. So if they're in your backyard and you harvest whatever you'd like from them, go ahead and treat them if possible. If they're plants that can be removed manually by hand, just make sure that you take away and remove the entire plant. Or if you're using herbicides to treat them, just again, make sure that you harvest what you want to eat and then treat them with herbicides just for your own safety. All right, so we'll go ahead and get into a few examples of invasive plants that you can eat. And all of these invasive plants can be found in Kentucky. Some of them are more prevalent in certain regions, but they're all here in the state. We'll start out with garlic mustard. And garlic mustard is found all throughout the state. As its name implies, it has leaves that have a garlicky or mustard-like taste. And this is best to harvest while it's young. Here in Kentucky, that's early to mid-spring typically. So we might be a little bit past the point where you can actually use garlic mustard leaves. However, I did read that you can boil the leaves down to make them a little bit more tender and less bitter now that they're older. So again, for the leaves, you can use them for pesto, soups, salads. You can dry them and grind them up and use them as an herb, or you can even saute them. The roots can be pickled, which is really great. And especially, this is one of these plants that can be hand pulled, but you want to remove the entire plant. So that way you can use the roots too. And then the seeds can be ground and used as ground mustard. So for each of these species, I'm going to just give a little bit of a description of them and then post a recipe on here. All of these recipes I got online from different websites. So you feel free to take a picture of them now. And I've got the website listed on there. But for those of you who are just listening, I'll just read the website name so you can look it up later. So this is a recipe for garlic mustard pesto, and it's found on foragerchef.com. And this is one of the recipes that I hear people most commonly using with garlic mustard. All right, next up we've got wineberry, and this is an invasive raspberry. And I've heard from a lot of people that this is the tastiest invasive that we have here in the state. And the berries can be harvested in June or July. Think about maybe if you grow raspberries or blackberries, that's when their fruit's coming out as well. And their fruit can be used raw in preserves or in pies. And any recipe that you are using raspberries or blackberries for, you can substitute wineberries instead. So you can see this is a newer one that's just starting to be reported throughout each region of the state, but it is here in Fayette County, and it unfortunately is growing. So here's a recipe great for summertime, and as it's getting really hot, like it has been the past few weeks, this is wineberry sorbet. And I got this recipe off of wildthistlekitchen.com. And again, since this is a raspberry, if you can only find a few wineberries, which is a good thing, you can just harvest those and then supplement the recipe with raspberries or blackberries instead. Next up, we've got Japanese knotweed, and this is a plant that really likes to grow along ditches and along waterways, and it's also best to harvest it while it's young. So knotweed has been compared to rhubarb in taste and texture, and you might even hear it be called rhubarb sometimes because of this. So the shoots of knotweed can be eaten, and they can be made into jellies, pies, breads. They can be pickled, made into curries or other creamy sauces, just like you would use rhubarb. And here's a recipe for fermented knotweed pickles, which I thought was really exciting. And this one was also found on foragerchef.com. Next up, we've got autumn olive, and as the name implies, this is an invasive plant that's fruit is going to be best in the late fall or early winter. Maybe if you've had one frost yet, that might make the berries a little bit more tender. And the fruit can be used just eaten raw. It does have a seed inside that is edible, but most people just like to spit it out. But again, it can be eaten raw, made into preserves, pies, or even ketchup, which I thought was really interesting. So here's a recipe for autumn olive ketchup. And I got this recipe off of learningandyearning.com. So if anyone tries this out, you should let me know, because this sounds really interesting and a really great recipe for the fall. Next up, we've got the invasive plant that most of us have probably eaten at some point in our life. We've got Japanese honeysuckle. So Japanese honeysuckle, if you haven't before, you can just take this little stem off the end of the flower and eat the honey coming out of the end, which I'm sure we all did as kids. And they are blooming right now. So the flowers can be used late spring into the summer, and they'll bloom for a while. And the flowers can be used for tea, lemonade, or jelly. And I just want to specify there are different types of honeysuckle. We have native honeysuckles and we have different invasive honeysuckles as well. And some of the invasive honeysuckles are not as edible or not edible at all. So you want to make sure that you are using the invasive vining honeysuckle, which is the Japanese honeysuckle. So if you see these blooms and it's in a vine form, you're good to go. And again, you can make tea out of it. And I got this recipe off of unrulygardening.com. But it's pretty simple. You can either dry the flowers and use them for tea later, or you can use them fresh. And a fun fact about this is apparently after you make the tea, you can actually use it to soothe poison ivy rashes as well, which can really come in handy. And then we've got kudzu. So especially if you are in the southeastern or southwestern parts of the state, You know that kudzu is everywhere. You're driving down the road, you can see it covering everything. Unfortunately, it's causing a lot of problems, but thankfully we can use it for eating as well. Goats really like to eat this too, so we know it's good. So the flowers are grape-like, or they smell like grapes, and they're purple, and they can be used in late summer, and they can be used to make jelly, candy, or syrup. The leaves can be treated as spinach or kale, and they can be used raw. You can bake them, you can cook them, or fry them. The shoots should be used while young and tender, and they can be eaten raw. They can be steamed or even stir-fried. And then the roots, particularly the larger and older roots, they can be dug up, they can be dried and even made into flour and used for other starchy recipes. And here is a nice breakfast recipe. So we've got kudzu quiche, and this recipe is off of bakespace.com. I'm definitely going to try this one soon. All right, so I appreciate you all learning about invasive plants that you can eat today. So again, I just want to recap and just say that although these plants can be beneficial to eat, we want to eat them and then remove them from the environment because they are causing a lot of issues. So if you all have any questions, feel free to ask now or shoot me an email. And also, if you have any recipes that you yourself have made with an invasive plant species, either one that was on here or not, please send me an email and I'd love to include it as resources for other people.